Mustafizur Rahman, who already introduced himself. He's a distinguished fellow from the Center for Policy Dialogue, Dhaka, one of the partner institutions for this event. And we have a very, very learned panel here. The first speaker is Dr. S.K. Mohanty, who is professor at RIS, again, one of the co-organizers of this event, New Delhi. The second speaker is Dr. Mahfouz Kabir, who is from BIIS, Bangladesh. Third speaker would be Dr. Paras Kharel, who is the research director of South Asia Watch on Trade and Economics and Environment, Nepal, Swati. Fourth speaker is Mr. Tamni, who is Director, South Asia Regional Cooperation Development. Welcome, sir, on behalf of ADB Manila, he's coming. And at the end, we have the discussant, Ms. Diksha Singh, who is also Program Coordinator of Swati. So we have a very, very exciting panel ahead. And without wasting time, I hand over today's session to Professor Mustafizur Rahman, reminding him of the time of 3 to 4:30, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I think that this symposium is very important, particularly in the context of the upcoming 5th summit of the Bimstec, and also the experience that we are going through in the context of the ongoing pandemic. So I think that in the morning session, I guess there was, as you have rightly mentioned, very important discussion with regard to strengthening Bimstec-wide cooperation. This session is an opportunity to take a deep dive into some of the concrete issues of how to deepen and broaden the regional cooperation among the Bimstec countries. And the particular theme that we will be discussing today is building up the regional value chains and production networks by taking advantage of connectivity and trade facilitation. I think that with regards to building the value chains, these two are extremely important. And in our region, we are struggling to translate our comparative advantages into competitive advantage. We are trying to take advantage of the various the various initiatives that we are currently taking. Particularly, I would mention in the area of transport connectivity. So I think that this is also an opportunity to take advantage of the transport connectivity, and along with that, the trade facilitation. But because if we just have transport connectivities but don't have trade facilitation, I think that the value chain is not completed and there is a weak link. And as we know, a chain is as strong as its weakest link. So I think that we should look at trade, investment, and trade facilitation and transport as a wholesome thing, and that's what is needed for our the 7 countries in the Bimstec region to take our economic potentials forward, and particularly in the context of the pandemic, as I was mentioning. Many countries are pursuing regional cooperation. Many countries are going from offshoring to nearshoring. So in that context, the Bimstec countries will also have to situate themselves. So I think that the rules of the games and the comparative advantages are also changing before our eyes. So we should not be left behind. And coming from Bangladesh, I also am particularly concerned about the upcoming LDC graduation of 3 of the members, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan. We are used to preferential market access, but we will have to make a very important transition as we graduate from preferential market access driven comparative and competitive advantages to productivity and skills driven competitive advantage. So from that perspective also, taking advantage of regional cooperation becomes very important. As was mentioned already, to take us through these issues and other issues of importance and concern to us, we have four very distinguished panelists. I would request them to speak for maximum 12 minutes. 10 minutes will be preferable. But we know that they are very distinguished researchers in their own rights, and they will share their views with regard to the topic on the table, which I once again would like to mention: strengthening regional value chains, role of connectivity and trade facilitation. So to set the ball rolling, I will request Professor S.K. Mohanty from one of the organizers. Professor Mohanty has written extensively on regional cooperation in South and Southern Asia, and we will be very much looking forward to hear from him, his perspectives on why it is so important that we discuss this particular issue at this particular point in time. Professor Mohant, your 12 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Rahman. I am really very glad to see you after such a long time. I most likely in the coming year will meet sometime in RIS.
Yes, sure.
So I'll be speaking on regional value chain in the Bimstec region. Now, as we know that this is a very large region. Bimstec is a very large region in the world, and also the growth track is very strong over the years during the last 2 decades. And the region has really done pretty well in terms of various macroeconomic segments, and that's the reason why the region has grown so fast. It has all the time tried to focus on the macroeconomic stability, and most of the countries in the region, particularly during buoyancy between 2002 to 2007, that they adopted the export-led growth that has led to a huge jump in their GDP and per capita income. Now, in this particular context, I would like to say that intermediate is one which has really contributed to a very large extent to their trade promotion, and that has also led to interdependence of these sectors, particularly through parts and components. So the time has come that we should have integrated regional approach to ensure that the region is growing fast. Now, just want to, at the very outset, I'd like to say that the global economy has grown fast, particularly buoyancy, and then other regions have also grew fast. But the fact is that Bimstec grew faster than most of the many of the regional groupings, and also in the world economy. Just to say that in 2003, it was just contributed 2.7% of world of gross world product, equivalent to GDP. But that has gone up very significantly to very close to 5% in 2018. I mean, it's very amazing jump, and particularly there is steady growth one can see between 2011 to 2020, and in 2020 also you can see that the region has gone drastically up. The growth profile is also very much associated with that. One can see the growth profile of the region, particularly during buoyancy, was very fast. I think the fastest, one of the fastest regions in the world, with 7.5 growth rate during 2003 to 2007. but the pace has gone down to some extent in the first phase of recession, that you can see in the red blocks that you can see. But with the in the second phase of recession, beginning from 2012 to 13 to 2020, this is again risen to a very large extent. But after 16, it has come down steadily, and the biggest jolt that the region got in 2020 with the COVID. Now, coming to the specifics, that the region, the characteristics of the region, it is growing steadily. Most of the members, not one, Bangladesh is really the most important country during the last 2 decades. Very close to that of per capita income of India. Maldives has done relatively much better than others. Then
Professor Mohanty, can you change the slides, please?
it is not changed.
I can see only the first one. Is it okay?
No.
Huh?
Uh,
Yeah.
Is
Now,
it?
yeah. Please
I'm
change.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So the service sector has also grown very fast during this period, and interestingly, debt burden is not much with the regional economy much. Now, look at the profile of trade. The regional growth is primarily driven by the trade sector, and one can see that how the share of the region in global trade growing very fast and very steadily. It is growing. It was just a 2.2% in 2003, but it is now very close to 5% by 2020, despite the odd situation in the global economy. Now, in this context, I would like to say that how important is the global value chain sector to the region. I think we are definitely in the early stage of our engagement with the sector, uh, uh, but our position, you can see in the lower level, particularly the forward linkage upstream segment, where the value addition is very less, but we are more relatively more engaged in the manufacturing sector. And definitely in the our next endeavor would be to go to the uh, uh, downstream segment with the backward linkages, but definitely the early results showing that we are in the upstream level. Now, one can see the smile curve that I showed, that the importance is that in each stage, I think the production is growing along with the value chain. The upper two segments, which is mostly dominated by MNCs and developed countries, they are relatively higher value-added segments, where they also share more in terms of gains from GBC. High growth rate you can see in many countries in the region. The Spicky report very much showing. And now developing countries are now at the lower end of the value chain, but definitely picking up fast. Now, look at the inter-regional trade in the region. You can see that the inter-regional trade is definitely much higher than that of the SAARC region. But look at the GBC and intermediates. As we know, that GBC in a structured way is only into 8 different sections, HS sections out of 21 sections. But still, one can see in the total intermediate, this segment is very low for the region, so far as its inter-regional trade is concerned. That means in the semi processed sector of intermediate, it is growing faster than that of the GBC. That one can say. But definitely, the overall trade situation interregional trade is growing in the region. Now, if we look at the total intermediates, which is the driving factor, more than 50% of our trade is export is in the intermediate sector in the region. Intermediate is pretty large and also very little susceptible to global trade regimes. But you can see the small bars, the green ones, which are showing the GBC, which is now growing, but growing at a very small pace. Now, looking at the structure of GBC, as I said, that GBC, particularly parts and components, I refer to, is only into certain sectors. These are the left hand side. You can see the different HS sections, which are again the GBC products are again classified by the UN. And also we can see the reference in TIVA database of the OECD. There are nearly 300 products out of 5,200 products at 6-digit HS, which are part of GBC, particularly parts and components. Now, in this segment, you can very well see that two segments are very important. The shares one can see is very high for machinery sector and also the automobiles sector. So these two sectors are jointly covering nearly 10%, nearly 90% of the total trade. So this is the structure that we have at this point, but one can see that growth rate of the different components are different, but it has definitely slowed down to a very large extent in the period of second phase of recession. Now, some time back we undertook a study showing that what are those regional value chain in the Bimstec country. So that you can see that it is slightly concentrated around India, but one can see that each countries within the region are very strongly linked to the value chain sector, and most of the regional economies received negative or adverse trade balance in all the sectors in the GBC sector except Thailand. No, and also we also try to see the trade complementarities existing in different pairs of countries. We undertook specific sectoral studies to understand the level of or the possibilities of GBCs existing in the different sectors.
2 minutes, please.
Yeah. Yes, my last slide, very clearly indicating that intermediate sector is the lead sector in the region. Rapid growth is again very closely associated with regional value chain. Government has got a very important role in terms of promoting regional value chain, and therefore liberalization both in terms of tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers are important in this. And the government should also focus on developing trade infrastructure in the region. So regional investment liberalization is very much important to promote a regional value chain, and the region should also focus on developing specific regional products. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mohanty. I think that was an excellent presentation, and with a lot of analysis and insights. And I think that your point with regards to that some of the major ingredients are already there. Bimstec countries are pursuing trade liberalization, export orientation. But you have also said that although we are participating in global value chains, with regard to regional value chains, I think there are a lot of space to plug in. But at the same time, a lot of opportunities also. You have mentioned that out of only 300 products out of 5,200 in the global classification, we have cooperation. But I think that as you have mentioned in your smile graph, both in terms of upstream and downstream, there are untapped opportunities which we can take advantage of. And also policies of the government are important. Removing various barriers are important. So points very well taken. Market forces alone will not be sufficient perhaps to steer the development of the regional value chains. To take us through some of the points that Professor Mohanty has mentioned in his presentation, I now call upon Dr. Mahfuz Kabir, one of our own from BIS Bangladesh, Bangladesh Institute of International Relations and Strategic Studies. It's a leading think tank in Bangladesh, and Mahfuz is one of our very talented economists. Mahfuz, Professor Mohanty has mentioned that with regard to intermediates and if we go on sectoral level, there are still a lot of opportunities, and we see that if we take a Bangladeshi perspective, accepting ready-made garments, we don't see the advantages of value chains, regional value chains that much. So what will be your take on how to take advantage of the potential opportunities which Professor Mohanty has mentioned?
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to pay my gratitude to SCS for inviting me to speak. And BISS is also one of the organizers, so and I'm also grateful for that. So first of all, I'd like to, in fact, say a few words regarding my personal experience with the Bimstec and Bimstec FTA. So this is my PhD thesis, and it is on Bimstec FTA. It is basically trade response to economic regionalism in Bimstec. So whether it is a regionalism initiative or not, so that we have experienced over the last 24 years. So a lot of time has gone, and we had the experience of initiating a framework agreement of FTA back in 2004, and in the same year, the in fact SAPTA framework agreement was signed. But after 2 years, SAPTA was in fact implemented, executed, but we don't see any future. I mean, the foreseeable future of Bimstec FTA, and I think FTA is one of the pillars of the whole. In fact, it can be called as a glue. And Professor Mohanty was right. I mean, regarding the, in fact, product category level value, in fact, chain engagement. So it's very dismal picture if we see. And if we see from the world input output table, and you can see a very dismal picture. It's a very small proportion of intra-regional flow of intermediaries. So that, and in fact, the good thing is that the government of Bangladesh, if I say from the perspective of Bangladesh, so there are two major documents. One is a 858 plan of Bangladesh and the Vision 2041 document. This document is particularly, in fact, is a roadmap towards becoming a developed country by the year 2041. So now it's 2021, so 20 years ahead. So and said it has elaborate plan, and in both of the documents, it's clearly mentioned that Bangladesh should be a part of the regional value chain and also the global value chain. And there is a dedicated section on it in both of the documents. And also the documents mentioned that the country should in fact sign the FTA and also be explicit on the policies on engaging with the regional and global value chain, and particularly focusing on the East Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, and also the neighbors, especially with the Myanmar and India. So there is a policy, in fact, a target and the policy goal, but we have to implement this. So with the specific framework and definitely with the deadline and timeline. So it's not, in fact, explicit in any of the, in fact, any in fact policy and other policy, I mean the complementary policy documents. So that is a problem, but we also have some other opportunities, like Bangladesh government has now identified 100 special economic zones, and we are welcome to all the investments from the Bimstec countries. So, and one of the member countries like India has dedicated, in fact, special economic zones in the country, in different parts of the country, Veramara, Mongla, and so, and we are in fact offering the opportunities, but it's not within the framework of the Bimstec. So we are in fact taking initiatives, in fact, with in fragmented way. So that is not in fact expected. So that is the thing. And if we see the products in which the investments are coming, so mostly RMG. So that is the, and if we see the composition, I mean the export composition of Bangladesh, it's about 88% of the products. So these are the textile and clothing, and the Bangladesh is in the downstream. The upstream countries are like India mostly, and Thailand. So, and there is a good amount of flow of intermediate goods and raw materials, like I mean the cotton and or the textile products, like I mean the fabrics and other RMG accessories. But what about the other, in fact, areas? Like there might be, I mean, the good potential of automobiles and also electrical and electronics. So some of the countries like India and Thailand, they are doing very well. So in this area, but I mean it's not, I mean, the going on, I mean the glue is not working in the among the other countries, like I mean the Nepal, Bhutan, and also in Bangladesh. So that is an area in which, I mean, we have to work on. And since the summit is forthcoming, so this should be, I mean, taken into so in the meeting. So and other thing, like I mean the trade potential, I mean the potential of of the flow of intermediate goods. So that is very important, because if the intra-industry trade is not good, and if the magnitude is not that prominent, then it's not the value chain engagement. So that is the thing. And also the diversification. So that is also very important, because Bangladesh is promising, so it is going to become a regional hub. So as per the policy document, and it has also has lot of potential, I mean as per the different economic indicators and trade indicators. So definitely it can serve as the value chain hub within the region, I mean in Bimstec region. So, and definitely, I mean, there is a good option and prospect, but and the government also has, I mean, the explicit policy, in fact, initiatives. But as Professor Mohanty has said, so there are a lot of, in fact, behind and beyond the border constraints. So this is very important, because in my PhD thesis, so I found that if the behind and beyond the border constraints are addressed, then trade with the, in fact, member countries, the bigger member countries like India and Thailand, so would be expanded by 35 to 45%. But for with other countries like the smaller ones, Nepal and Bhutan, so the trade would be expanded by 70 to 85%. So it's a huge potential, and this will create, in fact, further impacts like and the multiplier effects on other traders and businesses. So we have to have, in fact, a joint initiative to remove the behind and beyond the border constraints. So, and in Bangladesh, so there are initiatives like the Padma Bridge and the road constructions are going on. But there are areas like, I mean, the removing the, in fact, barriers in the dry ports. So electronic data exchange, so that is very important, and paperless trade is important, and also the soft connectivity. So that is very important. So it will take time, but we have to have a, in fact, timeline. So timeline on the FTA, even though Bangladesh and India are, in fact, discussing on the SEPA, but we have to have a timeline on undertaking an FTA. So that is very important. And without an FTA, so it's very difficult. And in the FTA, the investment agreement, the agreement on services, and also the technical cooperation on standards. So all this will be packaged. So and also we will have a kind of a roadmap on the connectivity. So I think without this, we don't have the kind of good future and the kind of energy and initiative that started in the early years of, in fact, Bimstec. So I think these are necessary. So with this, I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahfouz, for those important observations and also suggestions. You are right that we will have to look at the behind the border and beyond the border issues, but I think at the border issues are also very important. We need trade facilitation. I think single windows and interoperability of the systems, all these will be necessary in order to take advantage of the transport connectivities that we are building. And you are very right that it is just not FTA, but a SEPA type of cooperation, comprehensive economic partnership agreements, which will really give us the dividends. And the point that Bangladesh is now building 100 special economic zones, and we are expecting a lot of FDI over there. But if we don't have preferential market access in the region through SEPA type of agreements, then obviously we'll be at a disadvantage vis-a-vis countries like, for example, Vietnam, which are party to TPP, CPTPP, and RCEP, and also EU-Vietnam FTA. So obviously there is an issue of competitiveness in going forward. So your points are very well taken. And we also have with us the audience, and we will give them also some time. But at this point in time, I would like to invite Dr. Paresh Kharel, Research Director of SOTI, one of our partner organizations. Paresh, Nepal is also slated for graduation. And I know that like Bangladesh, you are also strategizing in view of the upcoming graduation in 2026. So how do you see Nepal in going forward and taking advantage of Bimstec-wide cooperation when Nepal will also be losing a lot of market access in many of the countries? So please, your 12 minutes. Paresh.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Rahman. Hope I'm audible.
Yeah.
Thank you, the lead organizer, ISCS, for organizing this and giving this opportunity. Now, yes, Nepal is set to graduate in 2026, and I'll also be discussing about it. Now, as far as global value chain is concerned, if you just look at the metric, Nepal is integrated into global value chain pretty much. So if you look at the backward participation index, 15%, forward participation index, 15%, so 30%. So that's not that lower than, say, for example, Cambodia. But that's a small consolation because the volume is very low. You see, just to put things in perspective, $1 billion, about $1 billion is our total merchandise exports for a country with a population of 30 million. So increasing exports has always been a challenge, and LDC graduation will make that even more challenging. Now, coming to Bimstec, a question is there in Nepal. Now, initially the question used to be, well, Nepal is part of Bay of Bengal or not, but we have crossed past that point. Now, Nepal is formally part of Bimstec. Now, will Bimstec be able to deliver where SAFTA could not deliver or not? In what respect? Now, FTA is in the works, I know that, but I'm not privy to the details, of course. But I think a critical aspect of that, to answer the question, how will Bimstec FTA be different from SAFTA and deliver more, would be a mechanism to deal with non-tariff barriers. Now, this may sound hackneyed, but this is a very reality in terms of trade in South Asia. It should be able to have a mechanism that deals effectively with non-tariff barriers, which are already constraining exports within SAARC at the bilateral level as well as regional level also. But hopefully with 2 ASEAN members in Bimstec, and we have to talk about Thailand or Myanmar also. Otherwise, if you don't talk about them, then again, Bimstec is just SAARC minus a number of countries or BBIN. So hopefully with 2 ASEAN members, the experience in ASEAN with regard to tackling NTBs, and they have made some progress there, will help bring that experience into dealing with NTBs within Bimstec FTA. A time-bound program of action of sorts is required to address this critical issue of non-tariff barriers to increase exports. Now, that exports may be part of GVC or may not be part of GVC, but as long as exports increase, employment is generated, as I mentioned earlier, that's good for landlocked countries facing challenge in increasing their exports. Now this FTA should also be able to address para-tariff barriers, which are also stymieing trade within South Asia. For example, we, Nepal and Bangladesh, are in the process of negotiating a PTA. It has been slow. We don't know it will be successful or not, but para-tariff barriers are an issue, and whether Bimstec will be able to deal with this or not. If Bimstec is able to deal with this, then we'll not have to even spend time negotiating bilateral PTAs also. Now again, that may be a tall order, but then if Bimstec is not able to deliver in these important things, then again a question will arise as to how different it is from others. Now again, with regard to opportunities within Bimstec, now I would like to posit some realism. For example, let's not even go for, let's say, Myanmar or Thailand. Let's just talk about Bangladesh and Nepal. So initially, even in policy documents, focus is on India or maybe China or Western markets, which are important markets. But then gradually it has begun to sink in among policymakers and the research community also, and Saudi has also been taking some lead in it, doing some research where we have found that there is potential to export, for example, simple things like fresh vegetables to Bangladesh, where there is a good market. Of course, certain barriers and other barriers will have to be removed, but the potential is there, right? So one thing is that although the potential is there, stakeholders, including the private sector, are not aware about even the potential of market in Bangladesh, whereas they are obsessed with, say, the Indian market. So since both Bangladesh and Nepal are part of Bimstec, this sensitizing the private sector on the potential would be very important. Now, coming to special economic zones, Bangladesh is also coming up with special economic zones, and Nepal, unfortunately, is very late in the game. Nepal has just one special economic zone. It is yet to attract a lot of firms. And moreover, LDC graduation in 2026 is also likely to constrain our ability to provide incentives contingent upon exports, right? So as fast as possible, we should get our act together. Now, getting FDI into SEZ will be critical to joining global value chains also, because these are all about networks and having contacts. Now, running these SEZs efficiently is important first, right? And for example, China, and we have to talk about China, though it may cause a discomfiture some quarters with regard to talking about China in a Bimstec context, but that is the reality. China has tremendous experience in running SEZs, but India may also have some experience there. Thailand has also done good with SEZs. Now, bringing foreign investment in operationalizing SEZs is critical to making them operational. And here, Bimstec could potentially play a role as long as geopolitics does not play spoil sport. Now, finally, coming to connectivity issue, again, a question is, what can Bimstec deliver that BBIN already is not delivering, or Nepal-India cooperation, or Nepal-Bangladesh-India trilateral cooperation are not already delivering? For example, BBIN and Nepal-India cooperation, or BBIN Nepal-India-Bangladesh cooperation is already delivering some things. For example, Nepal-India connectivity, and hopefully Nepal-Bangladesh-India connectivity. Now, what does Bimstec add to this? Frankly speaking, it's BBIN plus then through Myanmar, we can go to rest of Southeast Asia, right? So the most important link here that adds value to Bimstec is simple, it's Myanmar. So talking about Bimstec connectivity without getting Myanmar on board will be unrealistic. And even conferences like these, think tanks, when they organize conferences like this, we must redouble our efforts to bring stakeholders more from Myanmar on these events also. And member states should engage with Myanmar and India, because it's a driving force of Bimstec. Its approach to Myanmar would be a determining factor in Bimstec connectivity. Otherwise, as I said earlier, even at the cost of boredom, a lot of things have been happening at BBIN. But to move from BBIN to Bimstec, if we are looking at land connectivity, then Myanmar is the key node. And here geopolitics will be important, extremely important, and how sensitively we deal with the situation in Myanmar will also be important. I'll just rest my case here for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paras. A very important point, and you have very rightly mentioned about BBIN, and that Bimstec will have to be BBIN plus But I would mention that BBIN itself also, it's still a transport corridor. It's not an economic corridor. And we will have to do a lot even to make BBIN effective. But BBIN then can be a building block for BIMSTEC-wide cooperation. And you have rightly mentioned, although coming from Bangladesh, we know the political economy that is evolving, but you have rightly mentioned that BIMSTEC's advantage for our countries from South Asia is that it gives us a foothold into the ASEAN market, taking advantage of market access if and when the FTA comes into operation. So those points are very well taken, and you are very right. Special economic zones, yes, they can give us unencumbered land, but we have to do more in order to attract investment. We can build the SEZs, but attracting investment depends on trade facilitation, investment facilitation, and then we can attract FDI from the region and outside of the region that accesses the BIMSTEC market, taking advantage of the preferential market access. So that's how we will need to do that. For example, in Bangladesh, as Mahfouz also mentioned, 100 special economic zones. But if we cannot implement the One-Stop Service Act, which we have taken in 2018, then obviously, we will not be able to take advantage of that. And that brings me to Mr. Thiam Hee, Director, South Asia Regional Cooperation Division in ADB, Manila. Mr. Thiam's intervention will be very important because I recall that when World Bank and others were not interested in cross-border investments and promoting regional and sub-regional cooperation, it was ADB, in fact, which had the distinctive contribution in terms of taking up projects to promote sub-regional cooperation. So I think that Mr. Thiam's perspectives on how, from his experience, he looks at BIMSTEC, both at the BIMSTEC level and also from the perspective of sub-regional initiatives that we are taking. So Mr. Thiam, your 12 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the very kind words, and thank you for the the nice word for ADB also. So I've been, as you know, in ADB, regional integration is not just part of our strategy or our operation. It is part of our charter, right? One is there right at the beginning when ADB was formed. We said that we are there to support regional cooperation and integration in the region. So definitely, we are very much supportive of Bimstec. And, currently I'm working in, of course, the South Asia department. But before I was working in our research department and also in our Southeast Asia department. So I'll try to bring a little bit more sort of a broader perspective. I know the previous speaker, most of them have focused on issues specific to the country. So I will try to bring in sort of the regional masala into the discussion. So I think the problems of the low intra-regional trade, relatively low income in the region, difficult terrain and geography. All these, I think, the other speakers have mentioned. So I will not elaborate them. Let me just focus on what I think is like one of the key things. Geography, poor transport connectivity. All those are things we will of course need to resolve them. But there's also things that takes time and takes money, right? But one of the things that we can do quite quickly and doesn't cost very much, if anything at all, is actually to improve the trade facilitation environment. We all know the constraints about the trade, the poor roads, the poor railways, landlocked, but not too often. Sometimes we do mention it, but not too often we talk about the red tape, right? The bureaucracy that can hinder the trade and add to the problem. So I think that's one of the things that we really need to improve, and that's actually one of the things that we that ADB try to, sort of support. We know that most countries in the region, Bimstecs, have signed up to WTO. So they already agreed to implement many of the trade facilitation arrangements. But while they promised they will do it, they have yet to do it, right? So this is where I think there's a need for a nudge. Sometimes it's not because they're unwilling, but they, sort of like, how do we go about doing it, right? How do we do it? So this is like kind of things that we at ADB, through the SASET program and through our own partnership and support for the country, we have been trying to do that. And of course, all this thing about, of course, over the last 2 years or so, we've been hit by COVID. So one of the main things that happened after COVID, all the paper trail disappear. So once we come to this, moving to this, exports and import documentation, it's also important that we can try to move away from this requirement for having a lot of paper documents, which can be, hard to process, takes long, and move to a much more simpler digital trade infrastructure. So the other thing that I just wanted to highlight here is, a lot of things we are doing. In fact, I can tell you right now, we are doing a project in Bangladesh. So this is actually quite an innovative project. It's part of our SASET program, but of course, Bangladesh is also a Bimstec, and all the countries that will benefit from this is also a member of Bimstec. Is to basically improve both the border crossing points in Bangladesh and improve the procedures. Again, the thing I mentioned about many of the WTO trade facilitation arrangements have not been implemented. So we are working on both fronts, right? So unlocking the bottlenecks or the red tape at the border, and then also improving the physical facilities at the border. So these are like sort of what we are looking at doing. We're also looking a lot, I think there was a lot mentioned about SEZ and so on. So one of the things that we are also doing is to try to improve this concept of economic corridors. We think that this is an important point that we can have. So, it's basically trying to bring together the, different modes of transport and the cross-border country to sort of cooperate, right? To make things flow smoothly throughout the region. So we are looking at potential in India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. So in India, as you know, we have the East Coast Economic Corridor, and now we're also looking at the Northeast Economic Corridor. The other thing that we are working actively now is, the impact of, the other thing that, COVID has affected is the supply chains, right? So one of the things that we are trying to look at is to look at what are the products that are needed, to make many of the products. So mapping out the supply chain, you want to put it that way. We're also doing some analysis about the logistic movement to better understand where are the choke points. So, I think this is becoming more and more important that, a lot of time, we may not know exactly where the bottlenecks are. And, if we identify the bottlenecks, we can also better give the support. I think I will more or less stop here. Just to mention the last thing is we have been, of course, working closely as a partner of the Bimstec Secretariat, which recently have finished preparing the master plan on transport connectivity. And I think that will be endorsed soon in their ministerial meeting. We have prepared a trade facilitation framework. So again, as I mentioned, one of the key initiatives we like to see here is, of course, in supporting the trade facilitation, and we're also supporting on the tourism. I know this is slightly outside the discussion about the regional value chain, but this is kind of thing that that we're trying to do. So, and the final thing I just want to mention is on the transport connectivity infrastructure financing. As I mentioned, to improve the transport infrastructure, a lot of money is needed. How do we get the money, right? So ADB can help, of course, but ADB can only provide so much. The needs for the Bimstec region are huge. So maybe I stop here. I think well within the 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Thiam. I think your points are very well taken, and we know that ADB is, as we speak, doing a lot with regards to a number of issues that we are discussing today. So ADB is very much on the ground, present there, and helping our countries. And you have very rightly mentioned about trade facilitation and the growing importance of trade facilitation. And our countries have taken various commitments under the trade facilitation agreement of the WTO, and these are time-bound, commitments. And even though the LDCs were given some flexibility with regard to the three categories, category A, B, and C, but once we graduate, the demands will also be increasing. And trade facilitation is something that we should pay attention, not because we have a WTO trade facilitation agreement compliance, but it helps our enterprises in order to be competitive in the regional market. Look at the shipping costs, which are going up like 400%. And as I was mentioning, the pandemic with its near-shoring and other strategies pursued by our competitors, we will have to take advantage of our neighborhood. And there, as Professor Mohanty and Dr. Mahfouz and Dr. Paras mentioned, that a lot of gaps are there. And thank you, ADB. You are right. It's not the only kid in the block. We will have to take support from the AIIB, from the New Development Bank, World Bank. I think it is huge investment, in fact, if we really want to build up the supply chains and the value chains. Thank you very much. Now, we have a number of issues that have been put forward by our four very distinguished discussants. So the Herculean task to discuss all these now falls on the shoulders of Ms. Dikha Singh, Program Coordinator of SOTI. Dikha, your 10 minutes.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the organizers for providing me with this opportunity. And thanks to all the presenters for providing excellent insights into how trade facilitation can strengthen regional value chains and how Bimstec could play a crucial role in this. Based on today's discourse, I have some comments based on the discourse, and I have some additional questions as well. I hope not directed at any particular presenters, but I'll just ask the question, and I hopefully they will provide the answers or have further discussions on that. So one of the major issues when it comes to any regional trading arrangement would be about how to address the issue of unequal levels of economic development the member countries are in. So the regional arrangements need to recognize that lower income countries' realities and help level the playing field for these countries, especially the agreements, trade agreements, and any other kind of economic partnership agreements should address this. So Bimstec FTA framework, which was signed in 2004, and the negotiations that have followed since may not fit the existing conditions of these countries. And it is a nice thing that Bimstec is negotiating an amendment to that framework agreement. So Bimstec should realize that these issues. So while these agreements are being renegotiated or being amended, so more other issues that are usually shut out at traditional agreements, but now more and more economic partnership agreements are taking up, such as environmental concerns, labor issues, and gender mainstreaming should also be taken into consideration. I think the forums like this will be very useful in pushing for that agenda. And so Bimstec could not only focus on liberalizing trade in goods and services and facilitate investment in order to deepen the economic engagements between the countries, but this other concern should also be taken up for sustainable engagement and sustainable engagement within the region. And Professor Mohanty has also emphasized on addressing behind and beyond the border constraints that needs to be taken into consideration, especially for the countries, smaller countries like Nepal and Bhutan that already suffer from constraints created by landlockedness. So, and since we are already referring to different levels of development of the member countries, it should be noted that uh, four of the member countries are going to get graduated from their LDC status soon. So hopefully the FTA and the complementary agreements within the Bimstec will also recognize that. Uh, but then again, the question with regard to FTA Bimstec is that Dr. Kabir has also pointed out that it has been taking so long for any thing to materialize in this regard. So it is kind of questionable that member countries' commitment towards bringing this Bimstec FTA into operation as well. So as Dr. Kabir pointed out that there needs to be a specific timeline for FTA to come into operation so that all the member countries could reap benefits. So another issue I think regarding BIMSTEC is this bilateral versus regional. Uh, so Dr. Khariel has also pointed out that what is BIMSTEC? So how BIMSTEC will be different other from any other free trade agreements, even different from SAFTA for South Asian countries, except for access to some of the markets in Southeast Asia. So, and in addition to that, most of the countries are part of other bilateral or other regional arrangements, and so regional arrangements, and it kind of looks like that more countries are leaning towards bilateral arrangements. So in this BIMSTEC region, so is it due to, so this is my question to the panelists, that is it natural for the countries to lean towards more bilateral arrangement, considering the low level of intra-regional trade? So is it so how should the policymakers sell BIMSTEC to the people, to their voters? So that is one. And okay, yeah, and to add to this, another question I would like to ask was, so since the intra-regional trade is quite low, could BIMSTEC be really effective when to bring out to increase trade engagement, even exchange of goods in the region, especially when the value chains, the regional value chains in the region are not quite strong? So, and then to add to that question, what about the investment? So intra-regional investment in the region is also not encouraging, not only the merchandise trade. So, and it is proven that foreign direct investments are quite crucial in developing value chains. So is there a space to be optimistic about BIMSTEC being able to enhance investment cooperation within the region, and that it will be effective in creating regional value chains? And this was also asked by Dr. Khariel, like, so, and the final one is related to BBIN and BIMSTEC. Like, so seamless. One of the major features of BIMSTEC arrangement was the seamless connectivity it offered to countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan, where so BIMSTEC connectivity is supposed to bring down the cost of trading for these transit-dependent countries. However, it is kind of more easier said than done. So, for example, even the BBIN motor vehicles agreement was supposed to do that, and it was signed without much resistance like 5 years ago. So, but nothing has come up of it. Even Bhutan has backtracked its endorsement, but still, the countries have nothing has progressed much in this regard. And also, as our chair has pointed out, that BVI is more of a transport corridor, so it could have been more easier, but still it hasn't happened. So in such a scenario, like how possible does operationalizing Bimstec MVA or multimodal similar agreement appear in this region, especially considering the security concerns in some of the areas where some of the key areas of intra-regional connectivity. So, and mostly when we talk about Bimstec and trade connectivity, we kind of gloss over the security concern. So I think we need to focus on that as well. So this is it for now. I hope chair will facilitate like who's going to answer these questions, and I can repeat if there's any confusion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dika. I think your points are very well taken, and the questions that you have put, I do wish to give 1.5 minutes each to the panelists at the end. Yeah, your questions and observations are important. But I think that we have now completed the negotiations with regard to the FTA in goods. So hopefully it will be signed in the upcoming summit. As far as I understand, the goods negotiation has been completed. But one of the advantages of Bimstec was that the FTA included both goods and services. So with regard to services, there hasn't been any progress to talk of. So that is one. And in this days and age, I think that services and goods trade in goods and services is quite closely entwined. And if you really want to be competitive, the services are also very important. Trade facilitation and everything included, transport services, because these services are embedded in trade in goods. So at the end of the day, so both of these are important. And you have also mentioned the various levels of development within the Bimstec. That's also very important. We know that India has given zero tariff market access to all the 4 LDCs under the SAFTA. We have taken advantage of that to some extent, but with trade facilitation and transport linkages and taking advantage of these to build up the value chains, I think that is what is very important. The triangulation of investment, trade, and transport linkages. So thank you. We have a few minutes, maybe 15 minutes. I'd like to request our friends from the Secretariat to help me in this regard, whether we have some questions on the chat box. If you can kindly also share the questions with us, and if someone wants to talk, please indicate. I'd like to request our Secretariat to help me in this regard.
Yes, Professor, we do have one question in the chat box. If you can, you may also view it if you wish, but I may read it out just in case you want.
Yes, please do. Yeah, please do.
This is a rather longish one with a couple of questions compiled into one. Pray have some patience to hear to it. So my fault is the question maker giving you a bundle of questions together. It seems Soham Roy has about 3 to 4 questions compiled together. First of which is how the FTA of Bimstec will reinforce to tackle the aggressive debt trap policy of China. As Professor Paral Kharel said, Myanmar is very important in Bimstec as it connects BBIN to Southeast Asia. The India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway, or the Kaladan Multimodal Project, will facilitate the trade more smoothly. Is it possible to carry out the projects in Myanmar in this unstable situation because of the coup? If not, how the Bimstec is going to finalize the FTA?
Okay, thank you. Anyone else, please? from the audience?
Well, if there is any question from the audience, may please raise your hand.
Yeah, please do.
Then we will be able to allow you to question the panelists.
Okay, if we don't, I will give our panelists maybe 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. So I will go in the reverse order. Mr. Thiam?
Sure. Thank you very much. And I think it was great that this issue of, I'll just comment on the one thing that the discussant brought out, which is the BBI and motor vehicle agreement. So as was rightly pointed out, nothing much has happened as science, but I am happy to report that there are signs of life now, because we at ADB, we are trying to work behind the scenes to facilitate, the agreement on the protocol. And so hopefully, our efforts will bear fruits, and there will be something. So again, as I say, many of the things we do here in ADB, we try to facilitate, we try to provide the technical knowledge, right? And of course, at the end of the day, the country themselves have to decide, whether they go ahead. But we try to make the path or the way as easy as possible for them to sort of.
Yeah, Mr. Thiam, Dikha also mentioned that we signed it in 2015. And as you have rightly mentioned, the standard operating procedures have also been finalized, and we had a number of, trial already done. Yes, you are right that it will depend on the concerned countries, and ADB cannot, do that. But is there anything which can facilitate, incentivize these countries? Because as public policy analysts, we can see that without this, it will be very difficult, going forward to compete with, for example, Vietnam, which is pursuing aggressive, trade alliances at a time when we will be losing our many preferential access. So is there any suggestion that to incentivize our, countries and governments from your cross-country experience? Any bullet point?
The incentive-wise part basically coming from, making it clear, like, what are the potential gains and benefit from all this kind of agreement. Of course, as we all know, unfortunately, trade has become a very controversial subject, right? Free trade in general, right? Not specifically to MBA, but, not just here in the region, but around the world, right? We saw the backlash in the US, even, so everywhere in the world, there's this sense that, trade, doesn't really benefit the people. You want to put it that way, right? The exact, how shall we say, disgruntlement varies from country to country. But, in a rich country, it's seen that, as losing the job, and to a certain extent, that is also maybe some of the concerns here. So a lot of the thing is, we all know, right, as policy analysts, economists, trade brings tremendous benefit, right? The challenge is, how do we sort of, how should we say, help out or support those who have been, let's say, adversely affected by this kind of.
Yeah, thank you.
That's basically the tricky part. And I think, that, we cannot really do too much, because a lot of this is, up to the country. We just have to emphasize their gains, and how these gains are distributed, the countries will have to make the decision. Yeah.
Thank you. I think along with that, the costs of non-cooperation should also be forcefully argued. There are very high costs of non-cooperation. Now, Dr. Parash, Dikha has also posed a number of questions. There was questions from the audience as well. And I also would like you to also share your views. Do you see the current sub-regional initiatives that are being taken as building blocks for Bimstec-wide cooperation, or we are just just stalling and not taking aggressive enough initiatives to deepen Bimstec cooperation? How do you look at that?
Okay, I mean, with regard to sub-regional cooperation, I think even if you take the case of motor vehicle agreement, which was also mentioned, I think implementing it is, is a test for Bimstec also, because we have the Bimstec, let's say MVA, let's say forthcoming, and
Yeah.
if the proof of the pudding lies in the eating. So proof of the MVA lies in the effective implementation of BBI and MVA. If you cannot, I mean, really implement it, then after all, Bimstec MVA is just an extension of BBI and MVA, broadly speaking. Now, related to that, and also to Dikshaji's question, how does, let's say, should a landlocked country's government like Nepal sell to its electorate, Bimstec? So I think one could be connectivity, arguing that, okay, if certain connectivity measures are taken, trade costs will go down, and hopefully, like, exports will also increase. And even if access to, say, Myanmar or Thailand is pretty far off, let's say, for the time being, then even if, let's say, just improvement in, say, the management or, let's say, infrastructure in Kolkata port or Haldia port or in Visakhapatnam, or getting an extra port in the western coast of India, with which we'll be able to export to the US or EU at a lower time and lower cost, then that will also reduce trade costs, and that can be also interpreted as Bimstec. What's in a name, right? As long as our connectivity improves, whether you attribute to BBIN or Bimstec or Nepal-India cooperation, and most probably the government of India will attribute it to all three. Fine. I mean, so I think if connectivity moves further, then it can be sold. Bimstec can be sold in terms of connectivity. Now, my final point is with regard to the question posted. With regard to Myanmar, yes, if we want to move beyond, and I agree with Professor Rehman that BBIN also has a lot of way to go. But if BBIN then, let's say, materializes in terms of a real corridor, then Bimstec can add value to it only with the cooperation of Myanmar. That's a reality. So I think all South Asian members, to put it politely, all South Asian members of Bimstec, must realize that Myanmar has options. So better woo it. It's not a landlocked country that you can block it into submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Parash. Mahfuz, could you please share your views? Dikha has posed a number of questions, and also, as you know, Mahfuz, that Bangladesh had also expressed its interest to join the trilateral, transport connectivity. So, how do you look at that from a medium-term perspective? That proposal as well.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank again for the questions and comments. So, and just one thing I'd like to say. So that connectivity has no alternative. And physical connectivity is also is the same thing. I mean, both physical and virtual or soft connectivity. So if the trilateral, in fact, engagement, trilateral connectivity is implemented, then I think it will be very beneficial for movements of goods. So and if you see the cost of trade, so that is high, in fact, in the region compared to other regions, just because of the lack of, in fact, connectivity. I mean, the connectivity that is required. So and we are talking about the Trans-Asian Railway and Asian Highway, so talking a lot for years. So, but now it's time to, in fact, implement, and with the specific, explicit deadlines. So that is what I understand. And Bimstec has the role, in fact, to play on this, because it's a priority area of the organization. So that is number one. Number two is that if you really want integration along the value chain, so regionally, then definitely we have to have the connectivity that we are talking about, and definitely if we have good physical connectivity, then it will be followed by other, in fact, the soft connectivity. So if we don't have, so then we cannot, in fact, foresee a good prospect of the, in fact, region, as I would like to say. And if we see that, it's already Parosh has mentioned. So we have the example of the, in fact, motor vehicle. So it's not implemented, but still we have the concept. So, and we experienced the K2K. So that was in the track 2 level, and now, and then we saw that it was on, I mean, the governments of this region, I mean, the 4 countries, they took over, and then, I mean, they stalled. So we in fact want to see a functional kind of, we have to have the dream, but at the same time we have to have a timeline and functional kind of connectivity. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mahfuz. And Professor Mohanty, you have the last word. You have heard other panelists as well, and also shared with us your insights. So, what will be the take from your side?
I think very nice issues are being raised by Dr. Diksha Singh. To the very first question that whether the existing agreement on FTA, which is going to be signed soon, whether that is really the end by itself. Definitely, the answer is no. I think we have also partly mentioned about that. The exclusion of trading services stock is a major impediment. How long in the region we can only talk about shallow integration? Since mid 90s, we have already discussed and offered each other and done a lot, but still there is a lot of gap. So naturally, it should be a comprehensive one. Not only services, but also investments should be included in this to make the circle full. To the other question that we should bring in labor issue, labor standard issues, and others. I think I'm a bit skeptical in Singapore issues, for Singapore issues, we opposed vehemently in the mid 90s in the WTO that we are against labor standard, we are against the government procurements, you have against the environmental clause and also on investment. Now things have changed a lot, but definitely you should be very careful. If I bring it back in the MC12 in the WTO ministerial to be held in November and to December, after the talks in July, the new clause now, new point is now pushed by US that you introduce labor standard in the fishery subsidy clause. Uh, so I don't think we are prepared at this stage. Uh, if we initiate anything at the regional level, I'm pretty sure that sometime or other it would come to the global forum. And if we think that we are comfortable at this point of time to handle all those 4 Singapore issues, then I think we can take it off. Otherwise, it's a bit difficult, but definitely we can take it bilaterally. The next question, our point is that whether we should go for bilateral or regional. My answer is definitely we should go for both. There are many sensitivities bilaterally that cannot be raised at the regional level. But at the same time, regional negotiation has a different value altogether. So on broad core issues, regional cooperation could be very helpful in terms of bringing fast reduction of barriers. So therefore, reduction of barriers at the regional level is very much important, and therefore we should definitely think of bigger groupings like Bimstec. But at the same time, we cannot also neglect the sensitivities involved in the bilateral talks. So therefore, the present work on joint study group between Bangladesh and India and also with others could be considered as very important steps in this regard. In terms of low value chain, I think we have to be very specific about our performance. As I showed in my own presentation, that in the intermediate segment, we are pretty good. It is more than 50% of our trade with the region. But definitely in value chain segment, it is only just 10% of the total trade. It may be because we are comfortable in various various segments where the estimation of GBC is underestimated. For example, in case of chemicals, where you have got pharmaceutical, I think Bangladesh is very good, and also the new sector is building up in Bangladesh. So, if we really have a more engagement bilaterally or regionally, naturally it would add value to the segment, but definitely it won't come into the value chain sector or parts and components sector. So that therefore we should also be very careful that whether we are into the sectors which are more predominated by semi-processed segment or by the value chain sector. So that is also important thing one has to see. You have already India is concerned. We have already extended duty-free, quota-free system to most of the LDCs. I think most of the countries in the region is no more LDC now. But so far they have taken the advantage where 98% of their trade is almost zero from the end of India. So to the last question on the debt draft of China, I think I would definitely request Chair to answer it more, because we have seen the results of huge somewhat at one time we thought that it is almost with zero cost borrowing from China under BRI, but ultimately how it has evolved in China, in Pakistan, and then in Maldives could be a very glaring one. I think instead of dealing with bilaterally, I think Bangladesh is now is emerging as the second largest recipient of resources from under the BRI. Nepal is also trying to have it through transnational railways. So these are all good things, but one has to see the experiences of other countries. My suggestion could be that one should go for other multilateral or regional forums rather than going by the bilateral ones. So that it has got potential danger. Thank you. Chair, you're mute now.
Unmute yourself,
Thank
Professor.
thank you, Professor Mohanty. You have very succinctly responded to all the questions, in fact. And I agree with you that bilateral or multilateral or sub-regional, for us all routes matter, I think. So wherever we have opportunities, we will have to take advantage of that. And I tend to agree with your cautionary note with regard to Dika's point as regards environmental and labor rights. I remember that in Singapore in 1996 we had opposed vehemently. But in support of Dika, I would say that, you see, we are opposing this in the WTO, and one of the 4 issues was trade facilitation, and it came back after 25 years. So gradually, I think these issues we will have to build our capacities. It's not because we will not have multilateral agreements in the WTO, but because governments are wanting, private sectors are setting the standards. So these will become issues of market access, whether we have agreements in the WTO or not. I was looking at the proposed European Union's GSP scheme, which will come into effect after the current one, the 10-year program comes to an end. It will come into effect for 2024 to 2034. And in the new European Union GSP scheme, they are talking about labor rights, child rights, environmental rights, everything. So I think that there will be increasing pressure on these rights out of the multilateral trading system. So I think we better prepare for that as well. would like to also mention with regard to the debt trap. Now, for example, we are taking a lot of loans from China. That's true. We are also pursuing the 3 lines of credit from India worth about $8 billion. So it is the onus is also on us which type of projects we choose, whether they are economically, financially feasible and viable. So I think that if we don't do that, there is a danger that we can get into debt trap. Most of these are also suppliers' credit, and also the terms and the interest rates are also high. So obviously we have to be cautious about that, but we need huge amount of money from for the infrastructure, a huge amount. So you are right that just not be dependent on one country, but also diversify. So that is also very important. I'd like to leave 2 parting thoughts in the next 2 minutes. One is the involvement of the private sector in the discourse. I think that private sector is the driver in all our countries, and I see that academic discussions and involvement of private sector, there is a gap over there. If we can have more involvement of the private sector in this discourse, 2 things will happen. They will also become more conversant, and some of the reciprocity that we demand and which stalls reforms within our countries, because private sectors are against many of the reforms. So that also we can assuage their apprehensions and help them look at the broader picture. Otherwise, revenue concern, protectionist concerns, because they override the benefits, potential benefits that could accrue from regional and sub-regional cooperation. I think that this is one. Last point, I will say that I would like to make a distinction between regionalization and regionalism. You see, at the very beginning, Professor Mohanty, you have mentioned that we are opening up trade liberalization. All countries are now pursuing, these policies, and there is a regional sort of exchange of goods and services because we are opening up suo moto, unilaterally. But what we need is regionalism, conscious policy choices. And I think that that's where the major hindrances are. We are leaving it as it were, but in order to have trade facilitation, in order to have at the border, beyond the border, and behind the border reforms, you need a proactive state. So I think that policy choice is the prerogative of our governments and policymakers. So I think that conscious policy choice, which I call, as a distinction from regionalization, I call regionalism. That is something which our policymakers will also have to appreciate and understand. Till now, I see that academics and experts, we talk amongst us, amongst the convinced people, but I think that more involvement on that front is very much needed. With those parting observations, I would like to once again thank my very distinguished panelists, Dr. S.K. Mohanty, Dr. Mahfuz Kabir, Dr. Paras Kharel, Mr. Thiamhi, and also our discussant Dikha, Ms. Dikha Singh, for their very insightful analysis and also observations and suggestions. And the audience who has put forward a number of very important questions. These are also very well taken. And with those words, and once again, on behalf of our panelists, and Dikha, I would like to thank our organizers. And on behalf of our organizers, I would like to thank you, the panelists and discussant. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you,
Chair.
Professor. That was wonderful sharing. It was such an enriching kind of an interaction. There are a lot of takeaways that personally, as a student of international relations, I would like to share. And I think the thing that Professor said at the end is the issue of regionalism and regionalization. It's also important. You see, if you look at Bimstec, frankly, Bimstec has taken off since, I would say, the second decade of the 21st century. So there are a lot of things happening to it. There is a lot of, learn and, errors and fixing up things like that. So it will catch up steam hopefully very soon. But there are a lot of realities that one has to also take into account. One, Ms. Diksha had already mentioned about the level playing fields of different countries, different political systems and political different classes and wills and choices. And you cannot wish away geopolitics out of the window in any case. So for instance, we would have loved to have Myanmar over as one of the primary discussants. As Mr. Karela said, without Myanmar, we cannot even conceive of connectivity. We cannot conceive of value chains coming up, because that is such an important link. And India particularly understands that without Myanmar, that land bridge that we have been always talking about, to have the Act East policy or Bimstec, or even the concept of the larger Indo-Pacific that is doing the round and a slicing of, I say, part of the Bimstec also. So therefore, this is one thing we need more and more state stakeholders coming over, as much as also people who are really going to be affected at the ground level. What I see is all the policies that are being decided at the higher levels, at the decision-making levels, when you're coming down, when they're being executed at the border, beyond the border, behind the border, that is where the real game, real show takes place. For instance, if you look at the road connectivity between Kolkata through Bangladesh to Tripura, there are very few takers for different reasons. So these are realities that one has to face, one has to understand. And that is where the real stakeholders, people are going to be really affected from ground realities, have to come over, and hopefully organizers or other think tanks, when they come together, every year we have to shake our heads and learn and keep on changing and modifying and kind of, building upon the identity of Bimstec. And last, what I understand is that no way should we really think that Bimstec is going to be an alternative to bilateralism. Bilateral talks, bilateral kind of instinct has been there all the time. And this can only be, I would say, complementary to each other. And that would actually help the Bimstec identity come, which has actually happened in ASEAN, where ASEAN, we all know, is such a nice story about regional building. And in between them, the bilateral things have come in, so that the whole story has become very cohesive. That is one thing we may take from ASEAN, and we may move forward. So my point is that, Bimstec has a long way to go. We have, unfortunately, let it lie dormant for some years, and we have started building upon it, and we will hopefully take it forward, and we will have all more stakeholders, both from the state and from non-state actors, to put our act together. With this very optimistic note, I thank all the panelists and the chair and the discussant to have given us such good insights, which will be translated into pen and paper work very shortly. I wish all of you safety, stay well, stay healthy, and thank you for participating.